Okay, good morning. It is a happy Wednesday morning here. I've tried to record this, I don't know how many times, but we're just going to go with it and see what happens. And fingers crossed this one works. Um, anyway, I've been thinking about divorce a lot lately. Not because I want to divorce my husband. That's not where my head is at. But a lot of the women I help in my coaching has been around their relationships with their husbands since having kids and how much they have shifted, how much the relationship itself has shifted. And I spent a lot of time in the early days of my coaching in like forums, in like Facebook forums. And then there was this app called Peanut. I spent a lot of time in there just seeing what other struggles people were having in their marriages after having kids, because a lot changes for us as women when we have kids. And one of the things that can take a hit in that process is our relationships with our husbands. And I by no means am an expert on anything. I am just a firm believer in the concept of sticking it out in a marriage, especially once you have kids. And this is coming from no scientific studies at this point. Like, I have done research on it, but like at this point and at this moment, I am just strictly sharing my personal experience. This is all anecdotal evidence of my belief systems and why I believe that most marriages can be saved, especially once you have kids. And so, like the first thing I was thinking about today was like, where do I start? So I want to do a series on this whole concept of like why divorce is not the answer. And so this is going to be video one of that whole series. But I was just thinking, like, why is this so important to me? And part of it is that I am a child of divorce, and I've seen a lot of the evidence of what divorce does to a person in the child space. Like, as a child of divorce, I've seen the impacts that my parents divorcing has had on me. And I've seen similar impacts in people I know who are also children of divorce. But then on top of that, it's like, I've also been through divorces. Yes, that was with an S. I got married very young, and I got married to a physically abusive and verbally abusive man. And in that process, I really started losing myself, like being a child of divorce and then looking for love in all the wrong places, ignoring actual red flags that would have told me this is not right. And then, not taking the time to process what being in an abusive marriage meant for me is what led me to another divorce. And now I am currently married, and I have my 2 kids with my husband. And I won't go and say that we are happily married. We are very, very good. But, most days marriage is tough. Marriage is challenging. But so many of the things I am seeing in the online space are not things that I believe deserve to be divorced over. But if you read the comments in so many of these chats, in these forums, in the original post, if you read the comments that go with it, you like, divorce is the answer. Divorce is the answer according to these commenters. And it's just, like I said, knowing what divorce did to me, knowing what divorce did to several people I know, I don't think it's the answer. I do not believe that outside of like being cheated on, outside of actual abuse, I don't think that divorce is the answer. And I want to share several reasons why, but like what I'm seeing commonly and what I was experiencing for myself when I had my kids and really started feeling a lot more struggles within the marriage is this idea that our husbands have changed. Like the idea that, the things that didn't bother us pre-kids drive us crazy now. And, that's going to happen. Like once you have kids, like as a woman, we go through an entire actual change in our bodies, in our personhood, in our mindset. Like there are several things that are impacted as we have kids and as we step into who we are as moms. And it's not something I think that is talked about enough. But in that process, the emotional needs we have as humans, the natural emotional needs that we all have our needs, and our negative emotions are trying to highlight those for us. And in that process, we have to learn to listen to what those negative emotions are actually trying to tell us versus what we think will solve the problem. This is something, I work with a lot of the women that I mentioned, like a lot of my clients, I've worked with them on this. And the idea is that like learning to listen to what our intuition is telling us and actually respect what our intuition is telling us, because there is that inner voice that we, in most cases, in a lot of the cases, and in my case, I stopped listening to and stopped trusting myself. And a lot of that had to do with being a child of divorce. It started there. Like I 100% believe that it started there, in that idea that I was convinced as a kid that my parents divorcing was my fault. I can look back now and I can see how I was mistaken. And I can look back and see how so much of my life has been built on this premise that I am to blame for my parents divorcing. And it's clearly my fault. Like I still have struggles in my day-to-day life looking for reasons why things are my fault. And that's something that I see in a lot of the people who, not just the people I've worked with as clients, but like my friends from when I was in the military and the women who I've worked with as clients, like who have been a child of divorce. And, it impacts us. It has a big impact on us as we are learning to step out into the world and learning to listen to our intuition as adults, when the baseline for that intuition is this idea that it's all my fault, but we never really know why it's our fault, because it's not actually our fault. But that's one of the things I really am going to dive deeper into as the series continues. But the other thing I was thinking about was this idea of like, what if we were willing to look at where so many of these little things are building up in our marriage, because it's never one huge thing. It is sometimes one huge thing, but like most cases, it's these little things that build up over time. And I was thinking about this as like an idea of a pile of trash that we have just neglected. And it's a pile of trash living in our brains. But like the idea of like, oh, okay, this one little thing, I wrote it down on a piece of paper, this one little thing that really irritated me about my husband today. I wrote it down on a piece of paper, I balled it up, and I threw it into the middle of the brain. I miss the trash can and it's just in a pile next to the trash can. Or like, even better, probably a more accurate description of what's happening is these piles of papers. We'll stick with the paper analogy, but we'll stop with the trash can piles, and just it's piles of paper. This is my stack of things about my husband that are irritating me. And each thing that irritates me, I write it on a piece of paper and I add it to his stack. And I'm constantly filling this stack of papers that hold evidence against my husband and tell me how he is clearly annoying the heck out of me, and how the things he does irritates me, or whatever it is. But like, I'm making this pile of paper, but I don't keep track of anything that's in this pile. I'm not looking back through the pile. It's just a pile that I keep feeding. And when I go back to look at the bigger piles, like, I'm constantly feeding this pile of paper that has all of this evidence against my husband, but I'm not going out of my way to feed the pile of paper that has things about my husband that I love and the things that I'm grateful for and blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't fill that up. I'm putting all of my energy into filling up this pile of paper, this stack of paper that needs to be filed against my husband. And what if I was willing to go through that pile of that pile of papers against my husband, the ones that have all of this evidence that needs to be filed away? What if I was willing to go through and actually file those? And when I thought about it like that, in that version, I realized that most of the stuff in that pile is not stuff that I want to hold on to. But I wasn't actively engaging with my brain in a way that allowed me to decide. I was just making a mental note, putting it on the pile, making a mental note, putting it on the pile. And our brains will naturally hold on to the things that are negatively impacting us, because that's what they're meant to do. These things that are negatively impacting us are the things that back in the day, back in our cave mom days, would have gotten us eaten. The things that were irritating, the things that, like, these would have gotten us eaten if we left the cave. But now we don't have those dangers to deal with, but we still have that same brain. And so our brain is going to hold on to these negative things that we are collecting. And when we're collecting them and not actively engaging with them in a way that actually serves the relationship, actually serves us. Because, like, for me, when I'm holding on to these negative things, I don't feel good about it. I'm not enjoying holding on to this negative energy, this negative emotion. It's not something that feels good to me, but I'm clueless as to how to look at it in a way that neutralizes it. I'm clueless as how to look at it in a way that actually helps me figure out what it's trying to tell me. And until that moment when I really started learning how to process emotions for myself, and then helped my clients start processing their emotions, I didn't understand that negative emotions are supposed to be there. They're supposed to be there to help us understand a need. And so when I really started looking at it from that perspective, that was when a lot of my understanding about what marriage can be started shifting. Because, like, the downside of also being a child of divorce is that I never learned how to have a fully functioning marriage. And by fully functioning, I do not mean happy all the time, because that's not what marriage is. It's not supposed to be this happy, joyful, always relationship. It's supposed to be my rock. And that is what my marriage is. My marriage is the place that I can always go back to. Like, I'm a Christian, so I have God who I lean on. Jesus is my, ultimate rock. But, like, my rock here on this earth is my husband. He's the person who I know that I can lean on regardless of what is going on, like whatever's happening, like he's the person who I can lean on in crisis mode. He's the person I can, have support from when things are truly going awry, versus like there's a dish in the sink that I clearly just did the dishes, and there's another dish in there that could have just gone into the dishwasher, or, oh, his clothes are sitting on the floor next to the laundry basket instead of in the laundry basket. They're near the laundry basket. Or like the other day, I literally took a video of a pair of shorts that he took off. He folded them and he set them on top of the dresser instead of in the dresser. And the the dresser that he sat it on top of is the dresser that it was supposed to go into. But it's like all of these things, if I was sitting there and collecting all of these things and not filtering through them, they would start to add up. And so I guess my biggest message today is like, this is the start of a series I want to do on why divorce is not the answer. And part of that is, if we're willing, what if we were willing to sift through that pile every once in a while? What if we were willing to notice the times that we want to add to it? Like, what if we're just noticing like, oh, I want to add to that negative pile, but why? And, what if we were just willing to grab that entire pile and throw it out? Because ultimately, the things that are actually terrible in marriages, like I was saying, I came from a physically and verbally and emotionally abusive marriage. My first marriage was to a physically abusive man. I'm emphasizing that because my words are starting to slur together. I want to make sure it's coming out clearly. But he was physically abusive. And that's one of those situations. Do not stay. Do not stay if he's physically abusive to you, if he's emotionally abusive to you. And by emotionally abusive, I mean calling you names, belittling you, playing, like, you'll know like more about it as you look into it, but like those power games, like I've been watching a lot of cult related content, and it's been helping me, I think, process a lot of the things I didn't understand about what my mindset was after my abuse. And it's been super interesting to see some of the things that I didn't realize I was holding on to still kind of process through. But like, that's part of the journey, is allowing those things to process through in their time without making it mean a whole lot about who you are. And that's one of the challenges. But like, when I was coming up with this idea, and like I said, this is just video one, and it's mostly me babbling about what I want to accomplish in this series. But I hope that it's something that will help people, will help women, will help moms who are having a tough time in their marriages, but don't know how to get through it without the idea of like somebody throwing, hey, you should get a divorce. I don't believe that divorce is the answer. I don't believe that divorce should be the first answer. And as I was kind of thinking about that, that was where this idea for a series on, why divorce isn't the answer, and some tools to help you work through that on your own, as just developing a relationship with yourself that will end up serving the relationship with your husband. But ultimately, again, I don't think divorce is the answer. I don't think divorce should be the first answer. And when you go into these online forums, that's the first answer that they give you, that you should be divorcing your husband because he's clearly a loaf. He's clearly a layabout. He's clearly just the worst person on the planet. And they don't know all of the circumstances. They only know what you put in that post. And the other half of it is too, is like, becoming a mom is hard, but becoming a dad is hard also. It's not something that we just know how to do. And that was something I was lying to myself about. Like, I should just know how to be a mom, but that's not the truth at all. And that's, like I said, that's something I want to go into more as a part of the content on this channel, is the idea of what it is to actually become a mom. But dads also have to learn how to be dads. It's not something that comes naturally to them either. And in my husband's case, he didn't have a dad growing up. His dad bailed on him. So it's another case in point for why I don't think divorce is the answer in most circumstances. But what I want to leave you with today is just that idea of, when you notice some of those negative emotions coming up and, what's driving them, getting curious with what's actually happening there, because there is a need that's coming up from that negative emotion, but it might not be the need that you think. It might not be the thing that immediately comes to your mind, because that was what it was for me. It wasn't that I needed my husband to put the dish in the dishwasher, or put the laundry in the laundry basket, or put the folded up pair of shorts in the drawer. It wasn't that I needed him to do those things. It was that I needed him to understand the amount of work that goes into taking care of our home, taking care of our family. And when I was able to actually boil it down to what the need was versus what the symptoms that I was seeing around me, because the dish in the sink, the laundry, the clothes, whatever it is, like, those are all just the symptoms that are feeding into the negative experience I'm having. But underneath that, when I'm learning to get curious about what's actually underneath that for me, that's when I'm able to actually get my needs met and begin to shift the tide of what's happening in my relationship, begin to shift the tide what's happening in your relationship, whatever that may be. The first thing we have to do is really learn to listen to ourselves from a deeper space, not just looking at what's happening around us and trying to fix the individual problems, because that's not where the solve is going to come from. It's not going to make you feel better, and ultimately that's not what's that's not what's going to carry you through to the next iteration of your marriage, to the next iteration of your relationship with yourself, to the next iteration of your motherhood. Ultimately, learning to listen in here first is what's going to allow you to slow down and listen to what you actually need, and listen to what your intuition is trying to tell you, and listen to and trust yourself again. Because once, for at least that's what it was for me, I had struggled to trust myself because I had been wrong so many times because I wasn't listening to my intuition. And so that's where I want to end this video today, is just give yourself permission to go through that pile. Like, what are the things you actually want to hold on to? Go through that pile and ask yourself, what else could have been going on that made me want to put this in my pile of negative experiences when it comes to my husband. And stay out of the online forums, because they will not make you feel better. They will make you feel worse most of the time. That was my experience. And one of the reasons I stopped going in them as often is because it makes you feel worse. So your marriage is your marriage. Only you can be the ultimate deciding factor about what's right for you. But for me, I believe that divorce is not the answer. And over the next several videos, that's my plan, to share with you why I believe that divorce is not the answer. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.